and welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Here's a look at what's lined up for you on the show tonight. Our cover story tonight is about the G20, the group of 20 nations. Yesterday on the show, we got you the key takeaways from the G20 foreign ministers meeting. We told you how and why the crucial meeting had ended without a joint communique. And tonight, we take the story a step further. We ask if the G20 can survive, if it can make it through the Russia-Ukraine war. You know how this group came into being? After the end of the Cold War between the West and the Russia-led Soviet Union? Tonight, we ask if the Cold War mentality is back. Has the G20 become a divided house? Is the semblance of cooperation over? We discuss. Also on the show for you tonight, we tell you all about the protests against the Netanyahu government and why Sara Netanyahu, the wife of Benjamin Netanyahu, is in the eye of the storm. We also decode Elon Musk's grand brain chip plan. What does it have in store for you and me? Japan has discovered 7,000 islands. What does that mean for the country? What led to this discovery? New York police to include obese officers. What led to this change? We get you a special report. Our big question tonight is about the G20. Will this forum of international cooperation, born in the heady days after the end of the Cold War between the West and the Russia-led Soviet Union, survive after the dangerous fissures created by the Russia-Ukraine war? To start with, what is the G20? A forum of 20 leading economies formed in 1999, a decade after the collapse of the Soviet Union, as a symbol of a new world order of cooperation rather than confrontation. You see, it was meant to bridge the global divide created by the Cold War, a 45-year-long period of hostility between the West and the USSR, which began at the end of the Second World War. The world, as we all know, was divided between two zones living with nuclear arsenal, which had no economic cooperation and very little social interaction. A world dominated by spies and wars which threatened to go nuclear. The G20 was created to end this Cold War mentality, to ensure economic cooperation and to coordinate global policies on trade, which would enable all the sides to become richer, and understanding which would ensure that people could live without existentialist fears. 24 years, 17 summits, and countless resolutions later, has the G20 gone back to square one? Does the current summit in India mark the return of tensions and worse? I ask these questions because the frozen fire of the Cold War has been set ablaze once again by geopolitical rivalries. Let's just look at two scenarios. The news from the battlefront in Ukraine and the developments in New Delhi. On the battlefront, there is no breakthrough. The battle is still underway. the city of Bakhmut has become the latest flashpoint. It is witnessing heavy fighting between Russian and Ukrainian forces. And at the same time in Delhi, the foreign ministers of Russia, China, America, the European Union had ensured that all semblance of cooperation was over, especially the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Russian foreign minister. It seems the two came to the summit with their own agendas. Their differences on the Ukraine war ensured that the conference ended without a communique. Let's listen in to what they said. I'll start with Antony Blinken. He described Russia and China, that are virtual allies, as outliers and holdouts. He said he had also asked the Russian foreign minister to end the war of aggression.
I told the foreign minister what I and so many others said last week at the United Nations and what so many G20 foreign ministers said today. End this war of aggression. Engage in meaningful diplomacy that can produce a just and durable peace.
And next it was the Russian foreign minister's turn to speak. Sergei Lavrov, much like Blinken, he did not mince any words. He said in its bid to gather support for Ukraine, the West was only isolating itself. He accused the Western leaders of converting the G20 agenda into a farce. He mocked the democratic pretension of the West and accused it of bullying the other countries. You have to listen to this.
The West says Russia should face a strategic defeat. This aligns with their central problem with Russia. They attempt to preserve the hegemony on the world arena.
And in the end, the meeting ended in a stalemate. There was no consensus and no communique. Last year, the same script played out at the G20 summit in Bali. The leaders met, they quarreled, sang their own praises, and went back home. Russia, you see, is a leading member of this body. Yet, its president did not attend the Bali summit. America is also a leading member of this bloc. Its president, Joe Biden, attended the summit, but he chose to use the G20 platform to send out a message to the Americans about democracy. He went on about how the election results show the strength and resilience of the American democracy. This happened in November 2022. We are now in March 2023. Another summit will be taking place in September this year. But will it achieve anything? I ask this because the dangerous rifts have only become worse. The question is, where does this leave the group of 20 nations? Will this group, which once showed so much promise, decay into yet another useless talking shop? I mean, not for constructive talks, but a forum for accusation and even abuse. In fact, G20 could have become a forum for resolution of the Ukraine war. But instead, it has become a mirror image of what our world looks like today. Polarized and divided. Forget about ending the war. Can the G20 itself even survive the war? The body is already split on core issues. There are three camps. One supports Ukraine, one supports Russia, and the third, well, the third does not know where to look. There is an old saying, war is too dangerous to be left to the generals. And it seems war has also become too dangerous to be left to the diplomats. G20 was once meant to be the engine of a new world order in the 21st century. The war in Europe could send this well-intentioned body into the dustbin of history. And speaking of the Russia-Ukraine war, the battle for Bakhmut has been raging for months now. With Russia closing in, is the crucial city in Ukraine's east about to fall once again? And if the city does fall, what would that mean for this conflict, which is now in its second year? Will it be a stepping stone for Moscow in eastern Ukraine? Will it change the course of this war? Our next report tries to answer some of these crucial questions.
The Wagner Group units have effectively encircled Bakhmut. There is only one road left. They are fighting us, but their lives in Bakhmut are short. 1 or 2 days. Give them a chance to leave the city. The city is actually encircled.
A city besieged, facing relentless attacks from the Russians. The Ukrainians are digging in deep. The eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut is the epicenter of the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia's Wagner Group has issued a stern warning to Ukrainians that they should immediately abandon the city or face the consequences. With the noose tightening, the Ukrainians are making a desperate effort to hold on to their territory. Russia says that the Ukrainian troops are now blowing up bridges to stop their advance. But after intense non-stop fighting for 110 days, the city lies completely surrounded now, with only one route out left open for Ukrainian troops to withdraw. The city, which is now rendered a ghost town, had a pre-war population of over 70,000 people. Now almost every street bears the scars of the fighting. Thousands of residents have been forced to evacuate the city, leaving behind their normal lives and livelihoods.
I had a flat in the 8th district of Bakhmut. It doesn't really exist anymore. I worked all my life to buy it. I do not fear anything anymore. I was afraid when I was 14 years old. Now I'm 70 and have 7 grandchildren. Do you understand, my friend?
Ukraine also acknowledges the situation. Ukrainian army says the situation in Bakhmut is critical, with the enemy storming the city and fighting going on round the clock. Some units inside the city have been asked to withdraw. Struggling for a last few gasps, Ukrainian forces are now digging trenches west of Bakhmut. With the fall of Bakhmut, the Chasiv Yar area will be part of a new line of defense. If Bakhmut falls, it will be the first major victory for Moscow this year. Russia owes its success in Bakhmut to its Wagner militia. Before Russia began its military operation in Ukraine, it is thought that the Wagner Group had only about 5,000 fighters, but the group now commands over 50,000 fighters in Ukraine and is one of the key components of Russia in the war. The Wagner Group has publicized this video showing its fighters inside Bakhmut. U.S. National Security Council says about 80% of Wagner mercenaries in Ukraine have actually been drawn from prisons. The group is also infamous for its brutal war tactics, but many of such claims have not been independently verified yet. Russia says a victory in Bakhmut would be a stepping stone to capturing the rest of Donbas region. The region comprises of Donetsk and Luhansk. For now, Ukrainians are hanging on to their position, but the odds are heavily stacked against them, as regular Russian troops along with Wagner Group is firing on all cylinders to claim their first major victory for more than half a year.
Shifting focus for now, there is a threat to Rishi Sunak's office. Someone from within the Prime Minister's own party is coming for his seat. Guess who? I'm talking about Boris Johnson. He was the Prime Minister not too long ago, and now he wants his office back. What is he doing now to enter 10 Downing Street? Well, he is slamming Rishi Sunak. A few days ago, he proposed a revised deal for Northern Ireland, the Windsor framework, but his hopes to deal with the Brexit infighting suffered a massive blow. The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has openly come out against that plan. In fact, he argues it would stifle the UK economically. Listen in first to what he had to say.
Get to the punchline. I'm going to find it very difficult to vote for something myself, something like this myself, because I believed that we should have done something different. No matter how much plaster came off the ceiling in Brussels. And I hope that it will work. And I also hope that if it doesn't work, we will have the guts to deploy that bill again.
Now, Johnson's opposition was expected. All of this should not be surprising you. And let me tell you why. Remember, it was Sunak's exit that triggered the domino effect, which ultimately led to the collapse of the Boris Johnson government. Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer under Johnson, on the 5th of July, he walked into 10 Downing Street and offered his resignation to Johnson. And soon, Sajid Javid, who was then the Health Secretary, offered to step down. And the rest, as they say, is history. So clearly, there are scores to be settled there. But you see, Johnson will not be the first ex-Prime Minister to criticize Rishi Sunak's leadership. You must remember her, Liz Truss, the Prime Minister who Sunak succeeded. Not too long ago, Truss had slammed Sunak's economic plans. He criticized his tax policies, called them detrimental. This was after her own mini-budget had failed miserably and paved the way for her ouster. It's not only the men, women, but also the countrymen who seem to have distaste for Rishi Sunak. While some attack his decisions and policies, others make the battle personal, even targeting his teacups. When Sunak was being seen as a strong contender for premiership, a couple of journalists stationed themselves outside his house for hours as a gesture of hospitality. Sunak's wife, Akshata Murthy, treated them with a tray of tea and biscuits. Little did she know this would bite her back. The expensive cups caught everyone's attention. Their maker, Emma Lacey, confirmed on Twitter that each mug was worth over $45. Sure, this episode is more than half a year old now, but things have not really become better for Sunak ever since. While he does have the office of the Prime Minister, the question that's often asked is whether the party's clear mandate has come under the scanner and the trust to sustain the leadership. Questions being raised over that as well. Also, what happens if Sunak also is forced to exit 10 Downing Street? He will be the 5th British Prime Minister to leave office in 7 years. He was also the 3rd one within 2 months last year. You see, the UK government has been a mess lately. Ever since the Brexit vote, the British Prime Minister's office has become a revolving door of sorts. Just before the 2020 vote, then Prime Minister Theresa May had stepped down. Boris Johnson took over. He resigned in 2022. And then came Liz Truss. She also was ousted, leading to Rishi Sunak's rise to the prime ministerial post. And now no one knows how long Rishi Sunak will last. What was all this for? Brexit? Post-Brexit policies? Because 3 years since the vote, things seem to have only gone from bad to worse. Economically, post-Brexit, Britain has not quite performed as it was expected to. What really was the point? Well, let me tell you, it was supposed to give the UK control over its economy, over its trade. It had certain goals and economic targets. The Conservative manifesto reflected ambitions. that post-Brexit Britain would be free to strike trade agreements all over the world. It had a goal to seal deals with the rest of the world, covering 80% of its trade. Did the country achieve this? As of December 2022, it was set to miss the mark. It made deals covering just over 60% of its global trade. But what Brexit did achieve was political turmoil in the country, and it still continues to do that. Britain is a royal mess. It is one step away from getting its 6th Prime Minister in 7 years. I want to now take you to Israel. We told you earlier how Wednesday was a day of disruption in the country, a day of protests. Disruption over what? Over a reform of the judiciary. At the heart of these demonstrations lies a contentious government plan, a plan to shake up the judiciary. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's nationalist religious coalition government proposed this in January. What exactly does this plan involve? Have a look at these images first. As a part of this reform plan, the ruling coalition lawmakers would be given decisive sway in picking the judges. It limits the scope of the Supreme Court to strike down legislation or rule against the executive. The protests against the proposals have gotten more intense. They have gone on for weeks now. Those opposing the move say that the proposals undermine judicial independence, that they will isolate Israel and wreak havoc on the economy. They see it as an existential threat to the country. On the other hand, Netanyahu says the changes will restore balance between the branches of the government, that they will boost business. Netanyahu has declared that violence against the police will not be accepted, that the right to demonstrate is not a right to anarchy. And the anger on the ground, by the way, is not limited to just him. Benjamin Netanyahu's wife is also in the eye of the storm. Sara Netanyahu. Do you know where she was when Israel was witnessing this day of disruption? At a salon in Tel Aviv, getting her hair done. According to reports, a client at the parlor posted a selfie with Sara Netanyahu, and within minutes, hundreds of protesters laid siege to the parlor. The anger was palpable. Demonstrators outside the salon chanted, "Shame, shame." They did not try to force their way inside. The police arrived at the spot and Sara Netanyahu was escorted into a limousine. Benjamin Netanyahu branded the protesters anarchists. Let me just tell you a little bit more about the anger against the Netanyahus. They have been dealing with criticism, not just over these judicial reforms. There has been anger over how the life of luxury of the Netanyahus has been going on at the expense of the taxpayer. Netanyahu, remember, is on trial on corruption charges and he denies those charges. Sara Netanyahu, his wife, has been in the spotlight over the years. This is over accusations of misappropriating public funds, overspending on household expenses, pocketing gifts from world leaders. Let me tell you about what happened in the year 2019 specifically. She accepted a plea bargain to settle accusations that she misused $100,000 in public funds to order lavish meals from celebrity chefs at the Prime Minister's official residence, even though she already had cooks on the government payroll. $100,000. Sara Netanyahu, for that matter, has been a divisive figure in the country. The former air hostess turned educational psychologist has been accused of interference in Benjamin Netanyahu's decision-making. Former officials, in fact, have testified recently in court that Sara Netanyahu wielded undue influence over top security appointments. And there is more. She has been accused of helping drive the government's determination to bring about this change to the country's judiciary. That is the same reform plan which has triggered these massive protests on the ground. And that's not even all. Benjamin Netanyahu allegedly accepted gifts from billionaire friends in exchange for political favors, and this included tens of thousands of dollars in crates of champagne, extravagant jewelry for Sara Netanyahu. There is also the allegation that Benjamin Netanyahu struck backroom deals with newspaper publishers with the aim of scoring more favorable coverage of his wife. He denies all wrongdoing. In fact, just a few days ago, a parliamentary committee gave the go-ahead for fresh funding for the Netanyahus. And this, by the way, includes a rise of thousands of dollars each year in clothing and makeup expenses for Sara Netanyahu. Now, these demonstrations against the judicial reform plan are the largest protests in the country in over a decade. And Sara Netanyahu once again got caught in the crosshairs for being at the parlor getting her hair done while her country was witnessing this massive anger. It's as bizarre as it could get. Benjamin Netanyahu, by the way, posted a photo on Twitter. It showed him hugging his wife after she returned home safe following that salon siege. But what about the judiciary reform plan? Well, the government continues to embrace that plan, unfazed by the public outcry. The Justice Minister, who is one of the architects of this reform plan, has said that the government will not stop the legislation. So the government is adamant and the protesters are fuming. After all, these are judicial reforms in a society that values democracy. So what happens now? Just where will things head? Like I said at the outset, there have been growing concerns over these demonstrations. These kind of protests in the country have not been seen in years. And it remains to be seen which way things are headed now. Elon Musk's ambitious plans are under question. I am talking about his medical device company, Neuralink. For the last 4 years, he has been predicting Neuralink would start human trials, and he did not seek FDA's blessings before making these tall claims. Much to his dismay, the agency has rejected the application a year ago, but it wasn't reported until now. Just break this down for you. For those unversed, Neuralink is developing a brain implant. The chip would control gadgets through brain activity. In simple words, Elon Musk describes it as a Fitbit for your brain, something that could stimulate and record your brain's functioning. It's not a science fiction plot. These are Musk's real ambitions. But they don't sit right with the FDA. The agency has cited multiple serious concerns. The primary one being the device's lithium battery. There are many variables and risk factors. The tiny wires could migrate to other areas of the brain. And even if it is successfully implanted, how could it be taken out without damaging the brain tissues? While those are practical technicalities, I have a bigger question for you. How would those chips be used? I hope you understand, I'm talking about an implant that would sit in your brain, made by a private company. What assures that it will not be used for unethical purposes? For Musk's selfish benefits? Well, nothing. So what is Elon Musk's motive here? Personally, I would not want a Musk chip in my head. It might sound like a stretch, but it's like a virus that could plague people. He claims that Neuralink's brain chips will one day make humans hyper-intelligent. They would be left paralyzed, that they would let paralyzed people walk again. But what kind of intelligence are we really talking about? Something that aligns with Musk's ideologies? Does he really want people to think and act on his whims? To name their children something like X-A12, as he did? To share his dreams of colonizing Mars? Because it's still not clear what his real motive here is. And despite all the hurdles, Musk retains full confidence as far as his technology is concerned. He sees the regulators as nothing but obstacles to innovation. But what exactly is this innovation? What would he achieve through these chips? Is brain control his real motive? Does he want to eliminate people's individuality and have them behave like zombies? Even without these brain implants, Musk seems to have a certain hold on the people. Neuralink staffers and several investors are on board with his plans. And Musk fans have not hesitated from getting body implants. Some, in fact, have gone so far as to surgically inserting Tesla keys in their hands. Can we see it as a gateway to brain implants? Would it be the next trend if Neuralink chips ever pass human trials? Well, who can say? For now, the FDA is cautious and skeptical, but Musk remains optimistic. In December 2022, he predicted the implants would go to human trial in 6 months. That is in June 2023. This was after the FDA's rejection. Clearly, Musk is not giving up. What is he really up to? Let's now talk about islands. There are islands with an area of less than the Vatican City, sometimes claimed by 3 or even more countries. Seemingly insignificant islands hold strategic and economic treasure for countries. Every island offshore provides an avenue for military and naval bases. The 200 nautical miles area around the island's shores falling in a country's exclusive economic zone, which means that the particular nation can lay exclusive claim to all the resources available in this area. Now consider this. A country recently found that it has not 1, not 2, but over 7,000 islands which were previously not accounted for. The country which has hid the treasure is Japan. But Tokyo is not all that excited. We tell you why in our next report.
In 1987, when Japan last counted all its islands, the figure was 6,852. 35 years later, when it repeated the same exercise, the figure shot up to over 14,000. So Japan now has over 7,200 more islands than it previously thought it had. At a time when countries spat every now and then over laying claim to islands, Japan seems to have found a massive treasure trove. 7,200 new islands? Even if they are point size, this area under sea could be filled with priceless rare earth elements. or with millions of fish and other marine resources. The possibilities are endless. But Japan is not too excited. Why? Because this discovery does not increase Japan's overall area. You see, these islands are not new islands. These islands always existed and were already part of Japan's territory. So no new treasure for Japan, at least for now. But this raises another important question. How did Japan fail to account for over 7,000 islands for so long? Did it not know that the islands existed already? Well, it did, and let me make this clear. The new number does not include any artificially reclaimed land. So how did such a huge number of islands remain completely unaccounted for? Well, the answer is fairly simple. Japan just didn't count many of its islands as separate islands. When the Japanese Coast Guard counted the islands 35 years ago, the technology was not able to distinguish between small clusters of islands and larger individual islands. This means thousands of these islands were counted as one. But with technology leapfrogging by the day, the Geospatial Information Authority of Japan counted its islands with more detail in its latest survey. Also, in the years since 1987, volcanic eruptions contributed to the formation of new islands. We should also take a look at what is defined and internationally accepted as an island and what's not. Article 121 of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea defines an island as a naturally formed area of land surrounded by water, which is above water at high tide. It does not specify that the landmass should be surrounded by sea. Hence, islands can be in rivers, lakes, and even ponds. But Japan's GSI marks only those as islands that have a circumference of 100 meters or more. It also omits islands found within lakes and rivers. In any case, Japan's new island count is of international significance because it provides an accurate depiction of its rights, as well as the rights of other countries within the region's waters.
And for our next story, I'm going to ask you to imagine a world without laws. Imagine people being able to commit crimes without any fear. And what if you are one of the victims? You would then want the law enforcement officer to catch the culprit. Is that not right? But what if the officer is not fit and fails to catch the culprit? Well, if you are living in New York, then you better watch out for yourself. In our society, law enforcement agencies ensure that law and order are maintained, and for that, there are certain criteria which the officers have to fulfill. One of them being they need to be fit. But in New York, the police academy's move has sparked a heated debate. The police department has dropped a requirement for aspiring officers. It has removed a timed jogging test. Why is that? To attract new recruits. Let me tell you what exactly the United States' largest and oldest municipal police department has scrapped from its test. The aspirants were earlier expected to cover some 2.4 kilometers in 14 minutes and 21 seconds. And if they failed to do so, they were rejected. According to Juanita Holmes, who is the head of training at the department, the move was holding back some recruits, including many women, who would otherwise have graduated and joined the NYPD. The head of training has now, in fact, insisted that the timed run is not necessary to become an officer. And this comes months after the department dramatically relaxed its police fitness test. The aspirants who had to go through the physical fitness exam meant to simulate the exertions of an officer on the streets had already been made easier. They are now given more time to finish various stair runs, pursuits, and physical restraint tests. Moreover, the decision to drop the run follows a record wave of resignations. Last year, more than 3,000 officers left the department, more than any year in the past 2 decades. The controversial move, which the training chief, Joanita Holmes, said will help more women applicants make the cut, sparked an intra-agency battle between Holmes and the NYPD commissioner, Kishan Sewell. The city's mayor and a former police officer, Eric Adams, had to settle that issue, who reportedly agreed with Holmes as he was convinced it was no longer required. The change in the test also attracted derision from some former officers. Rob O'Donnell, a retired detective, tweeted, "The requirement was not there because officers had to run 1.5 miles on the job. It's about being able to." According to Police Executive Research Forum, police recruits in the United States are typically given far less training than those in other Western democracies. It found that academies typically offered about 5 months of training, while at the NYPD, the duration of training was merely 6 months, as compared to more than a year in England and between 2 and 3 years in some European countries. Moreover, the scrapping of the test has also led many to question the fitness levels of the police in the NYPD. One police officer from Manhattan, in fact, asked, "The police are already out of shape. What's going to happen from here on?" Let's now tell you what else made news around the world. Time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
UN nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Grossi arrived in Iran for discussions with top officials after his agency's inspectors in the Islamic Republic found uranium particles enriched to just under weapons-grade level. An IAEA report said uranium particles enriched up to 83.7%, just under the 90% needed to produce an atomic bomb, had been detected at Iran's underground Fordo plant. A Russian submarine in the Sea of Japan hits a land target over 1,000 kilometers away with a Kalibr cruise missile in a drill. Moscow has used these missiles to attack multiple targets in Ukraine by launching them from ships and submarines in the Black Sea. Thousands of fishermen in the Philippines ordered to stay ashore as authorities struggle to contain an oil spill from a sunken tanker that is threatening the region's rich marine life and economy. A Cambodian court sentences top opposition leader Kem Sokha to 27 years in jail for treason in a case that rights groups claim is politically motivated. Protesters gathered outside as lawmakers debated a new controversial law regarding agents of foreign influence. More than 5 feet of snow in parts of San Bernardino County in California has left some residents and vacationers trapped. A state of emergency declared in 13 counties. Italian Coast Guard rescues 211 migrants from an overloaded boat sailing in rough waters and bad weather in the Mediterranean Sea, around 15 miles off the coast of the Italian island of Lampedusa. Belarus court sentences Nobel Peace Prize winner Ales Bialyatsky to 10 years in prison. Opposition calls the trial politically motivated. Civil society around the world expresses outrage. Australia sealed their place in June's World Test Championship final with a 9-wicket win over India in the third test in indoor. The impressive win means India hold a 2-1 lead in the 4-match series. For the third test in a row, the match concluded inside 3 days, and the ICC rated the indoor pitch as poor. A supermarket owned by Lionel Messi was attacked by gunmen in Rosario, Argentina. Fortunately, no one was injured in the incident. At least a dozen shots were fired by 2 men, and they left a message on a piece of cardboard that read, "Messi, we're waiting for you."
On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. Thanks very much for watching. Have a good weekend. We're leaving you with Gravitas images.
Oh my God. Woo!
Oh no!
Bro, I'm telling you, see, avalanches are getting set off this walk.